Hello, everybody, and welcome back again to the Words of Life podcast with Kevin and Adam. This is our official last weekly recap of our goal, which was to read through the New Testament in the first 6 months of 2025. And so here we are. We're recording this on June 29th. And of course, July 1st is right around the corner. And then this will be the last posting officially in that block of goal, that goal that we set forth for ourselves. And so if you've made it all the way to the end here, congratulations. Less of a congratulations and more of like, hey, wasn't it amazing to read through the New Testament together? I, for one, have never just dedicated myself to reading the New Testament in this kind of format, and it was really great for me. I saw things differently just focusing on the New Testament, more so than any other study. So what about you, Kev?
Yeah, no, I found it really useful as well, right? When you're going through and you're spending that kind of, you're reading it quickly enough that you're seeing the connections, but you're not reading so little in the New Testament, like when you do yearly Bible plans sometimes, right? That, you lose the thread of what's going on in any given book. Or the connections between sort of like the themes in Paul's letters, or the connections between the Gospels, right? You can really get those pretty clearly here, and so I found it really beneficial. I do a lot of the preaching at our congregation, and so a lot of the lessons in this first 6 months were things where it's like, hey, here's things that I was just reading this week, and I just really found interesting or useful and thought about, and so shared them. So it's been beneficial for me as well.
Absolutely. And I don't preach nearly as often as you do, but every time I get a chance to, I say yes, and I'm in the same boat. This approach to reading the New Testament at this pace was really great. I got so much out of it. And listen, that was the whole goal. And we hope that it wasn't just to check off a box, but it was to really enliven our lives. Enliven?
I don't know, enlighten,
but to fill ourselves up with the Word and to fall in love with Jesus even more, and to give us the boldness and the courage to do something about it. Because the more knowledge we have, the more confidence we have in answering questions that may be difficult, and we're called to be people of action, not just people that are sitting on our hands absorbing knowledge. We hope that you've been able to take some action and tell people about all the great things you've been reading in the Bible and how it's changing your life. And that's really the goal. It's been great. It's been great. So that said, I suppose we could take a quick pause. How's your week been?
It's been good. It's super hot here. Like I'm sure everyone all over the country has been experiencing a lot of heat this week, very literally. So staying indoors a lot and just getting by, getting ready to come up on the 4th this week. So that'll be fun. Nice little holiday there. But
it will be fun. Yeah. Now, we're blessed out here in Tennessee that we can buy our own big giant fireworks.
Yeah, I saw the post from my sister there about you guys going to this giant, blow up extravaganza for what I was.
Well, so this one fireworks stand, he puts on a big giant fireworks show, and he prints out all of the fireworks that he's going to be launching in order, so you can take notes on which ones you liked.
So you want to buy them,
so you want to buy
it's a marketing gimmick.
That's exactly right. So not only do you get to, the ice cream truck out there and live music, or at least a big truck playing music, and of course you get to write down all your favorite fireworks, and hopefully they don't sell out, and you can buy them. That's his goal. He wants you to buy all the fireworks. So, but it's really cool. So every year since we've been here, we would go over to the Watkins house. They have 15 or 16 acres or whatever, so it's pretty safe. A lot of open land. And we can just launch to our heart's desire. So it's going to be really fun.
Some bombs bursting in air. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Megan and I just celebrated our 28th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it was cool. We dropped Noah off at a running camp. He runs cross country in Illinois. So Eastern Illinois University puts on this really cool running camp every year. And the first time he's been able to do anything like that. So we dropped him off, and then the next day we drove to St. Louis, where I've got an aunt and uncle who live there and some cousins. And it was just a really great visit. We got to spend some time with them. We did the St. Louis Arch.
Yes, we've done that, yeah.
That was really cool.
Yeah, it's a little bit claustrophobic-y getting up in there in the little elevator-y thing. And even when you're up there, there's not a lot of room.
I'm a pretty big guy, so getting into that pod was pretty crazy. But I'm like all cramped in there like this. But you get out and you see the little portal windows. Across the river is Illinois, and the other side is the downtown St. Louis. We went to the Cardinals-Cubs game, so Busch Stadium.
Okay, yeah, we
checked that off of our list.
Toured it when we were there, yeah.
And so, yeah, it was great. It was a really wonderful week. So we just got back yesterday, and and so we're somewhat recovering still, but a lot of driving. A lot of driving. All right. So regarding this week's recap, we have to cover the rest of the book of Revelation. So we only did for the first 3 chapters last week.
Yeah.
Which was a really good meat and potatoes section that's got a lot of application for us today in our churches and how we should do things. But you've got the rest of the book that we covered this last week. And so how do we cover it all properly and still get a lot out of it is the question. So we decided to take more of a thematic approach to the book and look at how it's broken down. And understand that the book of Revelation is daunting. It's an intimidating book. When you try to understand, if you try to understand and make literal application or literal understanding of every single symbol or metaphor or whatever that you find throughout the scriptures, you can really just get lost in the weeds. And so, without going into the depth of the symbolism and the apocalyptic language that's used there, and that's a fancy word for prophetic language. For how would you describe apocalyptic?
Yeah, I mean the word
times.
literally means the word itself literally means an unveiling, a revealing.
Yes, a revealing, right?
And so when we talk about people talk about the apocalypse as though it means the end of the world, but it doesn't really, right? It's apocalyptic. It means that it's revealing or demonstrating or showing the things to come. But yeah, it is prophetic language in that way, right? It's a revealing language, but in a way that is not just let me tell you my schedule tomorrow. It's an uncovering or an unveiling of things. That prophecy, prophetic language is a good way to describe it.
Yep, and as Kevin and I were discussing in our prep time, the people that got this letter originally, they understood it. Right?
Yeah, they had a big leg up, right?
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things you run into when you're trying to get to Revelation, even if you're not trying to break down what every single symbol means, right? One of the first questions you really have to kind of answer or figure out is, when is he writing this? Because that has big impact on some of the things that he says, depending on how you're interpreting some of his symbols and some of his, for lack of a better term, timestamps in the way that he does give them. And they knew. Right, they knew what date it was when they got this letter, so they have a huge advantage in that state because they don't have to figure that out. Right? His original audience knows, and so when he says things, and you'll even read things where he'll say, "Let the discerning person understand." Right? Those people in that time had a huge leg up on us because we're now going, well, it could be this or it could be that or it could be the other. It depends on right, and a lot of times it depends on when the book was written.
Absolutely,
but they know that, right? So some of the things where we say, well, maybe this is a possibility, would have never crossed their mind because that it would have been, right out, right? Like it couldn't be that because whatever.
And so as we read through this book, it wasn't written to us. We obviously, it says right out of the gates, all this stuff's going to happen soon. He wasn't writing it to us specifically.
Right.
So why do we need to read it, and what is there for us? And we have to understand that the major theme of this book for us today is that there is victory in God and in Christ through perseverance. And the major themes are hope, faithfulness, and endurance. And so hope, and we've talked about that a lot in our weekly recaps, that is such a major theme throughout the entire New Testament is hope. Hope meaning something we're looking forward to that we haven't achieved yet. And that hope for us is eternity with God and Christ in heaven. That's the hope that we're supposed to anchor our whole faith into. And that's why Christ came, so that he could bridge the gap for us, to give us an opportunity, give all humanity, the whole world, not just the Jews, the whole world the opportunity to become holy and pure and blameless for reals, and not just a putting off year after year as it was in the old covenant. So he's got this new covenant. We have this hope that we're anchoring ourselves in, and then we're called to faithfulness. And, we talked about faith throughout a lot, but through our faithfulness, our faith is demonstrated by our works that we talked about in James, not a meritorious earning our salvation kind of thing, but we're supposed to keep his commandments. That's what Jesus said. We demonstrate our faith, and then we persevere, because Christ also said that, hey, the world's going to hate you, and because they hated me. And if you're like me, they're going to hate you. And so we come to the book of Revelation. We here at the end, and John is unveiling this letter to these people, and that's really the message. You have to endure to the end.
Yeah, and so, as we think about, how do you cover the whole book then with that message in mind, right? It's probably useful, as we've already talked a little bit about, so we kind of outlined it in, sections which are going to be applicable no matter how you take the text, right? And so, we had the directions or the directives or the messages to the seven churches, which the whole book is to them, but they're specific to this church, right? This church, that, right? And then after that, you get this, which we read last week, the throne scene in heaven, right? The opening of the vision is just this great throne scene in heaven, which is not intended to be time-stamped, right? This is what it's like in heaven as our mortal minds can understand it. This is the vision that he had about the greatness of God, about the greatness of him on the throne. God is sovereign. Jesus is sovereign over all. And the key thrust you take out of that section, right, is there's this picture that's displayed up there, this great thing in heaven, but then there's this problem, right? There's this scroll that no one can open. What happens, what sets up the opening of the text then, the vision text, is then Jesus the Lamb. So that's a vision we're very clear on. The Lamb that appeared as though it was slain, right? Like there's no debate about who that is. In heaven, the Lamb comes and the Lamb is worthy to open the scroll, right? And so that then, tying into our theme, sort of sets that tone, right? That Jesus is in control here. Jesus is reigning no matter what happens in the rest of the text, right? And so then that's sort of the first subsection after the message to the seven churches is the throne scene in heaven, and what we need to take out of that as a whole for us is Jesus was worthy to open the scroll, right? Jesus is worthy because of his sacrifice. That's clear in the text. Because of what he's done, he died and overcame. Yep. He is the one who is worthy. He is the one who's worthy of praise. He's the one who will reign. Yeah. And he's the one who's in control over these things you're going to see in the rest of the book.
That's right.
Whatever they mean or however they're applicable to you, even if their original meaning wasn't for you, right? If he's talking about something that's already happened, for us still today, we say, well, Jesus was in control then, and he's in control when things are difficult now.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that happens there as John is experiencing this vision. So he's recalling it for us as if it was first person immediate, right?
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so John says, in the realization that nobody could open the scroll, John wept.
Yeah, right.
So can you imagine how it must have felt for John to have this sense of hopelessness? That's really why he would weep. Yeah. He knew the scroll had to be opened,
and none was found worthy to do it.
And so
when he sees that, right? The vision he saw was, these creatures surrounding the throne. I mean, things that are so far wonderful and superior to us. And his sort of thought is, if these are not worthy, then where in all of creation? Because he's seeing the heavenly things and he knows the earthly things. Yeah. Right? He's like, well, if nothing up here can open it, then nothing I have to offer, nothing I've seen. Yeah. So in his mind, it's like, no one is worthy. And that's why it causes his despair until the Lamb shows up.
Yeah. And so one of the like little small takeaway is that in Christ there is never hopelessness.
Right. Yep.
Never hopelessness. There's always hope. And so that is something that should drive us to want to share this with people.
Yeah.
We're going through the book of Ephesians right now, and in chapter 2 of Ephesians, it talks about the fact that that Christ was made alive, right? And we were made alive with Christ.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we have life, and it's not this physical life, because this physical life can be miserable sometimes. We have a real life to look forward to, which is amazing. Yeah. So chapters 4 and 5, we have this wonderful scene of the throne room, the Lamb that is worthy to open the scroll, and the authority of Jesus, the sovereignty of is definitely established for us. We can see how marvelous and wonderful that is, and it really kind of sets the theme for the rest of the book that Jesus reigns no matter what comes next. Yeah, which is powerful.
That what then comes next, right? If you're sort of thinking about it, the next chunk you can kind of think of altogether is sort of this 6 through 16 section, right? Yep. The majority of the text that comes next. And as we think about what's going on, right, it's helpful to picture the picture. John is effectively seeing a vision of what's happening in heaven, right, before the throne of God. So all of these things that are taking place at the throne of God. We'll see, the angel goes to the altar, which is before the throne, and the angel does this, the angel does that. He's seeing these things play out in heaven, right, in the heavenly realm. And so each of these things that he's seeing then are a vision in that way, right? I mean, we don't ever see what's happening in the heavenly realms. So is there a literal trumpet being blown, right? Not as we would understand
Right.
it. I mean, sure, maybe in heaven, but we would not perceive it or understand it anyway, right? And so what happens then in these judgments is you'll get all these things that occur, and they kind of break down in sevens, right? And so you have 7 seals that are opened, right? And as the 7th seal is opened, then you have 7 trumpets which are blown, right? So the trumpets are subsumed as part of the 7th seal, the 7th seal being opened, then kicks off 7 trumpets that happen within that 7th seal, and the 7 trumpets then blow, and at the 7th trumpet then there are 7 bowls or plagues or vials which are poured out in judgment, right? And so you have 7, 7, 7 in that way, and each of these things each of them as a whole, right? Like, what is the seal? What is a trumpet? What is a bowl? All of them as a whole, right? They symbolize these judgments that God is pouring out on systems, on peoples, on other visionary things, whatever you want to say. But all of them collectively, the key section here is to recognize the judgment of God, right? Because it ties back to who's on the throne. God is on the throne. And so these things that are happening in this big part of the text, you don't need to try and figure out what are the stars that are swept down, what
Right.
is the earthquake, and what are the boils poured out, and what is the thing turning to blood. None of that is that important as far as the literal, on this date, this event happened, and that could be, right? That's sort of the kind of argument and nitpicking you get into sometimes where you miss the bigger picture. Because the bigger picture piece that we're supposed to take out of this is that God sees the injustice that's happening, right? A lot of this is predicated by the saints are crying out and the calls of the martyrs are going up to him. How long, Lord? How long, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is response to that God sees the injustice, God sees the suffering of his righteous ones, and he will make things right. And the message then we can take out of that is the same thing that whoever his first century readers were, right? That in that judgment, in that pouring out, his faithful were protected, right? We see this image of those who kept their robes white, right? Those who are washed in the blood of the Lamb, and these kinds of imageries. These are the ones who are being justified or relieved of their suffering by the judgments that God is pouring out in these 7 trumpets and seals and bowls and all of these things that are going on in that.
But it's not a promise that we will be protected physically here in this life.
Sure. They were still suffering things, and they were martyrs, right?
Yeah.
They died.
In fact, it actually mentions these are the ones who died on earth through this tribulation.
Yeah.
And so we have to understand that God's ways and God's vision is a much longer timeline than our vision on this earth. Humanity is plagued with time.
Yeah.
We live within time as humans. We have a beginning and we have an end. And we see all things through the timeline of our dates and our calendars and our clocks. And so for us, it's one of the reasons why this life we cling to it so much, because it's all we know. But we're called through Christ and through the teachings of the apostles to look beyond this life. And that's the hardest challenge that God has for us, for all of humanity, in my opinion, is that you have to look beyond this life. It's so hard.
Yeah.
It is so hard.
For sure.
I mean, look, we can name dozens of atrocities and massive, wars and things like that have happened throughout history. And being in the middle of that, we have conflicts going on right now where people are dying. And people are being persecuted, and people are being murdered for no reason, and it's horrible. And imagine going through that without hope is even worse. And so these Christians who will be persecuted and will be killed, and there are people like that right now today, that we have to understand, though, that there is hope. Yeah. That even if you are not protected in this life by God, it may be because your death might be the catalyst for somebody to move towards God. And it may just be, listen, I'm saving you right now so that you can be with me.
Yeah, and I'm always reminded when we talk about things like that of it is, my daughter will sometimes ask me, well, what's your favorite verse in the Bible, right? And I'm always like, it depends.
Depends on the day.
Like my dad used to always say, he asked about your favorite movie. Well, it depends. I got categories. Yeah. What's my favorite? I give you a top 10 in all these different categories, right? Similar way with the Bible, right? But one of them that stands out to me a lot is when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are standing before the king, right? And he says, God can save us from the fire, but he's going to save us from you, right? Either by delivering us or by burning us up. Yeah. But we're not going to have to deal with your nonsense anymore, right?
One way or the other.
Either
God's
way, we're good,
us.
Right? We're good. God's going to save us from you either way. And so, it's that same sort of a picture here, right? There are these that are suffering, and the justification for many of them is what we see happening in 17:18, the judgment that comes, because they're defined as the martyrs, right? There are ones who have died and held on to their faith and did not defile their robes, and their justification comes in the hereafter, right? Not in the present, in their own present lifetimes, and that's very clear from the text. So we should not expect today that I may not suffer things and God's going to deliver me from every little thing along the way. My death will be deliverance enough, right? Is kind of the picture that happens there. So that's kind of, and look, there's some good things, some very fast, you're kind of glossing over the specifics there, but there's some really fascinating imagery and language in there. I had a book, I don't even know where it is. It's probably I can see it up there on my shelf. This book that was called Visions of Revelation, and basically it's an art book. Some artist just drew each of the different chapters, right, or painted each of the different chapters, and there's some fantastic paintings in there as he's painting these. He's not trying to describe or define them, he's just painting what's depicted there, right? So the vision itself and the depiction of the things is fascinating and amazing, right? And so you get these picture 12 of the dragon and the woman, and giving birth, and the dragon tries to swallow her. She's given wings of an eagle to fly away. I mean, it's a great vision. Right? It's an amazing picture, a word picture that John is seeing, that he's trying to write down now for us what he saw. And certainly artists throughout time have depicted these and drawn these things, right? There was a movie which I do not recommend people necessarily watch for its content, but it's of the Hannibal Lecter sort of Silence of the Man series called Red Dragon, right? And that entire movie, the premise of it, is based on a picture which was painted by an artist named Blake, and it's a very famous picture called The Great Red Dragon, right? And this picture, this very famous picture, is a key plot point in that. But that comes from this vision, right? He was at that artist at the time, that Renaissance artist, was painting pictures of things that he read in Revelation. Right? So it is fantastic in its imagery. People have been enamored with the imagery for generations, right? And have depicted it in wood cuttings and paintings, and every other sort of thing you can imagine, because it's riveting, right? And that's sort of its purpose, is to grab the attention as you look at that. But again, don't get caught up on those things. The overall message is the tribulation, the judgment that's coming on mankind, on the people of God, on their suffering they're going to have, and their ultimate justification and vindication at the hand of God. And that's what then pushes into 17 and 18. Right? 17 and 18, we really get this fall of these corrupt powers, right? Which seems to be, at least in John's first century writing message to those people, the fall of those corrupt powers that were in authority at that time. Now, we can certainly take from that, hey, if God has judged the nations then, he will judge corrupt powers now, right? But it appears very clearly he's talking to those people to say, listen, because he will say several times in that section, and even the end of the previous section, let the discerning one understand, right? Let the person who knows, right, understand this symbol that I'm telling you. I'm writing something down in symbol, but you should be able to decipher this and understand it in your present day. Not for them to have to say, oh, it's about something 10,000 years in the future or 2,000 years in the future. They were supposed to understand their present day something about that symbol. And so certainly he has in his immediate mindset some sort of present judgment of corrupt systems, and it seems pretty clear what some of those are, because he will even say, in that 17 and 18, we'll get the angel comes and says, why are you so confused and wondering? I will tell you what these things mean. And so for us, we're like, great, what is it, right? But then the language he uses is revelatory and still somewhat concealed, right?
Right. Well, but it was
probably more evident to those people in the first century.
Exactly. So before we move on to that, though, we just talked about this big chunk 6 through 16, right? So I don't know how young I was, before I was 14. I may have been 12 or 13. And for whatever reason, read through the book of Revelation and, was in awe of all of its, like, all of the pictures and things.
Sure,
like that, right? But it may be just morbid at that age.
Sure, morbid curiosity.
But I decided at that point what I wanted on my tombstone.
Okay.
And I had it highlighted in this Bible that I had for a really, really long, the first Bible my mom got me.
Yeah, right.
That sort of thing. But it was Revelation 14:13, right? And it said, I heard a voice in heaven saying, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on.
Yeah.
And yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. And it's kind of an obscure memory verse, but I've had that embedded in my head in the New King James Version.
Yeah, right.
For a big chunk of my life now. But
Sure.
in that verse, I don't know, maybe it's helped me to try to live a life that's worthy of that to be put on my tombstone.
And I think that's sort of the purpose of the book.
Right.
Overall, the purpose of the text is to encourage the living to live in such a way, right, that they will be counted amongst those who are righteous, right, in the text, that they'll be counted as worthy of the Lamb, right, that they will be those who are described as having their robes white, right, and these things, that they died in the Lord.
Yeah.
And that phrase, we will use that at funerals and things for those we know. It's a great thing to want to say, oh, this carved on my epitaph, right? I will ask, have you passed that word along to your children? Because they're the ones who need to know these kinds of things, right?
I've mentioned it a couple of times, but hey, it's here on YouTube for the whole
now,
world.
So anyone,
right? If you're out there and I die...
Hopefully it's sometime in the far future, but yes.
Right.
You'll remember that.
On a real quick side, a total sidebar.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know me, I am a singer. I've been singing my whole life. I love leading singing in church. It's one of my favorite things to do is to lead worship. And I have actually, like, half jokingly said that I want to record myself
leading singing
for my funeral. I'm going to pick out the songs. I'm going to lead it. I'm going to make sure everybody's happy and joyful because I'll be with the Lord.
Yeah.
And this should be a celebration and not a sad thing, But I don't know how well that would be taken.
Oh, that's going to go over. Yeah. I've told my children, you can ask my daughter, everyone who knows her or wants to, you go ahead and quiz her and see if she remembers. She should know. Every time just about we sing it, I will remind her that in my funeral, they're supposed to sing Nearer, Still Nearer, that is the song that is supposed to be sung at my funeral. And by preference, I'd like you to collect a good collection of bass singers, if that's doable as well, to make sure it's sung appropriately the way I want it sung. But yeah, that's the kind of things we think about sometimes for sure. But it's good, right, that we think about our end. That's kind of the purpose, that we think about our end and how it then impacts our life, right?
Well, and that's part of the hope. Like, if we are anchored in the future of heaven, it's easier for us to think about the end,
sure,
with optimism. And when you anchor yourself in a verse like Revelation 14:13, like, listen, I want to be worthy of that, and I have so much to look forward to that the end shouldn't be sad. It should be a celebration. And that's really the point of this whole book for these people, because they were going to be going through some really hard, terrible times. And who knows if we ourselves will also go through hard, terrible times. Probably, at least some of us. So, yeah. All right, so we get to 17 and 18.
Yeah.
We talked about, this idea that, evil empires don't last. And they don't get the last word. God is always going to get the last word, and he's going to win. And then, we do have this idea, this talked about, this idea of Babylon.
Yeah.
Right? And so this gets tossed around a lot, Babylon.
Yeah, this chapter here is really sort of, when you go in and you try and figure out, what are the specifics, right? So if we zoom in a little bit and we say, okay, we know the general text and what it's about, say, well, what is it? What was the original thing that John wanted his readers to understand in the first century? And a lot of that stuff boils down to, again, when you date the writing that John penned this, and a lot of that boils down to, because that is going to set a key sort of time marker, if you will, that shows up in chapter 17. Right, so when you get into chapter 17 of Revelation, you're going to get this statement at the very beginning. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters, with the kings of earth committing adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth who are intoxicated with wine of her adulteries," right? And so this vision he's seen before, he says, "Come, and I'm going to show you the punishment of this one," right? And so then the name written on this prostitute, right, is Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and the abomination of the earth. And so the question is, okay, well, who is that, right? And then it says in verse 6, John saw it, was greatly astonished, and the angel said, verse 7, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides," which we saw these beasts come out of the earth, and the beasts come out of the sea, and all these kinds of things that have happened in the previous section. And he says, "I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and the beast she rides, who has 7 heads and 10 horns," right? And so you're like, oh, awesome, great, what's the explanation, right? But this is now sort of a key anchor verse to try and understand the when and the who and the what, right, that this is. And so as the angel then explains that, how you try and figure out what that explanation is going to obviously color the specifics of what you're saying then is the meaning of the text in the original, because he'll give certain statements that are intended to describe, right? But you'd like him to say the woman is and give a name, right? But instead what happens is you get this idea, the beast. So he says, let me tell you about it. The beast which you saw, it's going to come up out of the abyss, which once was, now is not, and yet will come again out of the abyss and go to destruction. The inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom, right? And so he doesn't then tell you what's coming up. He says, this calls for the 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, but when he does, he will reign for only a little while. The beast who once was, is not now, is an 8th king, and he belongs to the 7th, is going to destruction, right? So you're like, okay, well, if we can figure out those sort of time-stampy statements that he makes in there, that would help us understand.
Right.
And so this key sort of indicator then is, who is the king that now is? Right? And if you knew when John was writing, that would be really a big deal, right? Because you could say, the most obvious interpretation then might be for the people who's reading is, I know who's king right now, and that then tells me the rest of this timestamp, right? And even there, though, there's argument, right? Because even under that interpretation, people will say, okay, well, we figured that out, that's great. But then other people say, no, the 7 kings aren't kings, they're kingdoms. Right, and so there's 5 that were, 1 that now is Rome, and then the 7th that's going to come is whatever, right? And so even there's going to be debate about what those things mean. But this is his explanation is almost as murky to us,
yes,
which was probably not to them,
nope,
as the vision was, right? And
well,
so
we
that's
have to keep in mind the overarching context that started at the beginning of the book, which said these things which will soon come to pass. Yeah. So it was not intended to be interpreted as a massive future end times overall meaning of the book. Yeah, the message of the book was not intended to be something super far in the future that has not it happened even for us. And so if you interpret this improperly, you end up with a whole bunch of theories and doctrines that stem off of this misinterpretation that it can really cause a lot of strife and false doctrine that contradicts a lot of the other stuff that we read in the easy to understand books. Sure. Matthew through 3rd John. Yeah, sure. And so it's really careful that we don't put too much stock into an interpretation of the literal meaning of these things. Yeah. And just take away what is intended for us to take away. Remember, they understood it. Yeah. We don't have to worry about whether or not they got the message. So because it's still here for us to read and to understand, what is there for us and what applications can we make, which is kind of how we started talking about it. Remember the theme, that victory through perseverance. That's the application for us. It's not necessarily dictating the heavenly realm as we are to try to understand it or what all those things. And so the reign of 1,000 years and all the confusing symbology and things like that. Don't get caught up in that. Just understand that God wins, and you want to be on God's team.
Yeah, and a key sort of piece in there that comes up in this text and other places as well, that Christians in general in our present age, I would say, and other times as well, but certainly right now also, we miss the point of what Christians are called to. And what I mean by that is, Revelation 18:4, which you had pointed out in an outline for us, right? That when all these things are happening in Babylon, whatever Babylon is being judged, it says in verse 4 of 18, "Then I heard a voice from heaven say, 'Come out of her, my people, and so that you do not share in her sins and not receive any of her plagues,'" right? And so, in the description that we get, in the vision we get, God is victorious and Jesus is victorious because he's the one who fights the battle. And the role of his people is to come out and be separate from the world, right? And when persecutions and things are happening in the letters that we read about in the other parts of the New Testament, the call for the people is to endure, right? And we in our present time have decided the role of Christians is to fight back, right? That our job is to fight against these forces. And yet, it's just never described that way in the New Testament. Our role is to endure patiently the suffering and wait for Jesus' deliverance. Our role is to come out and be separate, not to take up arms and to fight against the forces of this world. That's just not what's described.
Unless you want to do it in the manner of Stephen.
Right, yeah. If you're going to speak your piece and get stoned for it, then great, right?
Well, I mean, so what I mean by that is not that we should be looking for ways to find ourselves being martyred, but oftentimes we try to correlate like American, patriotism with Christianity, and we're going to fight the good fight, right? Well, when Paul says, "I fought the good fight," he never took up arms.
Yeah,
he preached the truth.
He preached
through
the gospel.
Perseverance.
That's right.
When he was persecuted for it, he continued doing it, even in prison, right? And so when we want to fight for the truth, well, we can only do that with the Spirit of Jesus, the gentle spirit of peace that Jesus taught and brought, the one that is submissive to authority, even unto death.
Yeah.
Right?
And so that's sort of the picture that's laid out here, right?
Yeah.
When all of these corrupt powers are falling, nowhere in here does it ever say, and the saints and the martyrs took up arms and overthrew the beast and overthrew the prostitute and the harlot, right? It's always that God brought his judgment through the pouring out of the bowls, and all the people did was they endured until that judgment came about, right? They separated themselves from it. They did not receive the mark of the beast, again, whatever that is. They did not do those things. They made themselves separate from the world. And you're like you say, our present time is to say, no, let's instead battle and fight, whether through physical armed conflict, which sometimes happens, through let's work the levers of government and work the democratic process to overthrow the evil forces. And that's just not what God calls us to do.
No.
Right? He doesn't say get in control.
He calls us to go into the fields that are white for harvest
and
be a laborer. That's what we're called to be. We're called to go out and say, hey, regardless of what's happening with the government, that's kind of like God's realm. We're going to let God deal with the powers and the authorities of the world. But are you going to heaven? Are you going to heaven? That's the question we need to be asked. Do you know Jesus?
Right.
Have you heard his story? It's amazing. Right?
Yeah.
And this is what Jesus has done in my life. He has brought me peace and joy and a fantastic marriage and a wonderful family. Not only a family that I have with my wife and my children, but a family of God's people that I can love and rejoice with and be so much happier and content in this life because we have a hope that's founded in heaven and not on this earth. And so, Jesus ultimately defeats evil.
Yeah.
All once and for all. In 19 and 20, right?
Yeah. So 17 and 18, right, is really sort of the overthrow, the downfall of Babylon, and you'll get at the end of that, right, the reaction of the world to that.
Yeah.
Right? And again, I would suggest it's the reaction of those people in that day and the world powers at that time to the fall of whatever who had profited from the relationships with Babylon,
Yep.
as is depicted in the text there. And then 19 and 20, you'll get sort of this final victory, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that 19 begins with then what the reaction in heaven is to the fall of Babylon, right? It's and then in heaven there was hallelujah and these great
Yeah.
calls out, right? And the king really appears there in 19 and 20, and when the king shows up, right, then evil is kind of doesn't stand a chance, right? Evil is destroyed; it has no ability, right? Down when you get again, who defeats the beast in 11 through 19? It's the heavenly warrior that shows up, right?
Yeah.
The one who's riding on the white horse, who's rated, the writer is named Faithful and True, right? And his description of it, he will rule and he will do these things, right? He's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, right? And it's great the way it's described there, because you get this, right? This king that shows up, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and then you get down to 19. I saw the beast, the kings of the earth, all of their armies gathered together to wage war against the rider and the horse and his army. And so you get this great climactic scene, right? Like, this is it, man, right? Like, there's going to be a great, huge battle here. And then, and in Hollywood media, we depict, as we do, the Armageddon and the great, all this stuff, right? But in the actual text that you read, it's like, and then verse 20, but the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who performed the signs, and the two of them were thrown alive in the fiery lake, and the rest were killed with the sword coming out of the mouth of the warrior, the rider on the horse, and the bird gorged himself on his flesh.
Yeah.
It's really no battle.
And Jesus said nothing but net, right?
Yeah, it's really not a battle. I mean, it's so climactic, and then it's anticlimactic. The warrior on the horse shows up, and he defeats them all in 2 verses, right? And the angels come down, they lock him up, throw him in the abyss. It's over before it starts, right? It really would not make good cinema at this point, right? You build and you build and you build, and then at the end it's just like, and it's over just like that.
Yeah, a
right?
whole team
It's
of
not
writers
really-
need to come in and like, okay, we need to add something.
We gotta spruce this up a little
It's
bit.
just not quite climatic,
Yeah, there's got to be more conflict. He has to really struggle to win. No, he doesn't struggle to win. It's just over, right?
Yep.
Just like that. And so, it is just it's done as soon as the King of Kings shows up, right?
Exactly.
The rider on the horse shows up. It's just over, just like that, right? And the people are victorious because of his victory again, not because of their leading out, joining in the army, and being driven along with him, and right? It's just he just does it in 2 verses. It's over.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In 2 verses, it's over.
And so we have this amazing final victory in 19 and 20, right?
Yeah.
And then for me, when there's a seeming transition into 21 and 22 that while I believe that all the way through 20 is definitely talking about events that were soon to come to pass. And I can't help personally but have the opinion that 21 and 22 transition to after that victory over that global power that we've kind of identified as Babylon the Great, whatever that was going to be. The people needed to still remember that eternal hope that we need to anchor ourselves in is what's going to be displayed in 21 and 22. Right? So, and that's something that we can also look at and say, man, I look forward to that.
Yeah, we certainly get a picture in 21 and 22, right? If we're saying, okay, as we've looked through each of these sections, and if you're kind of keeping your short little outline of what we put together, right? The beginning 3 chapters, you've got the message to the 7 churches. 4 and 5, you've got the throne scene in heaven. 6 through 16 is this judgment and tribulation and all the trouble. The meat of the book is in there. 17 and 18 is the overthrow, the fall then of these corrupt powers who are causing these problems. 19 and 20 then is just the victory scene, effectively, of the rider showing up and winning, and what that looks like when Babylon has fallen. And 17 and 18, what that reaction in heaven is, right? So it's the final victory scene showing up there. And then 21 and 22, right, is really this new creation, everything is new, right? A new heaven, a new earth, a new Jerusalem, a new, right? It's all of these things that are being played out there. Now, whatever those things are, again, maybe, as we're saying, pointing towards a future ultimate fulfillment of the new heaven, right, and the new earth. It may be, as they're being talked about here, right, the new state of things after the big trouble that they've experienced, right? What is the new state of things going to be? Because he talks about, I'll show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb, right? And the bride is this one who comes out. We see in other places the bride of God being described, the bride of the Lamb described as the church, right? So could this be talking about the time of the church and a different sort of dispensation that we're living in here? Certainly possible as well. But the ultimate picture that we're seeing there is this new kingdom, this new relationship, this new heaven and new earth, right? Whether that's after all of this physical physical earth is done away with, and now we have a new, this is the ultimate final judgment in heaven, and what that looks like, if it's another heavenly picture scene, or if it's just the victory being personified in this way. Certainly the end, even if it's talking about something that was happening for them in that time, even their end hope is the same as ours, right?
Yes.
Their end hope is then after this life to have this ultimate relationship and fulfillment of being in the place that is described in this way, right? This picture that's being laid out, this Eden restored, effectively, right? You get this picture at the very end in 22, kind of this reversal of the curse in Genesis, right? So in Genesis, we have these tree pictures and being cast out of the garden, right? But in 22, we get this picture of, there's a river of water of life flowing from the throne of God. Each side, there's the tree of life. Oh, we've seen the tree of life before, right? Back in Genesis. Bearing 12 crops of fruit, yield very much. Its leaves are for the healing of nations, right? No longer will there be the curse. The throne of God will be in the city, right? So you have this new Eden, effectively, right? This reversal of the curse at the beginning. And so the Bible story, in effect, ends as it begins, right? With that same imagery, like of the new Eden, the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and earth.
Again, in the presence of God.
Yeah.
Right? Just restored like they were originally in Eden, having access to the tree of life again. So this idea of being able to live eternally within the presence of the Lord. So all these great bookend ideas, it's pretty amazing. One of the things that you can definitely walk away with is that in God, there will be no more tears, no more curse that we have, this curse of sin, this curse of the frail life that we have, right? So that we won't be cursed that way. And this idea of God dwelling with his people. Yeah. Right? So I referenced that we're studying through Ephesians right now. Right at the end of Ephesians chapter 2, we have this idea that the Christ is the cornerstone of this temple that we are being built on. And the foundation are the prophets and the apostles. Christ is the cornerstone. The apostles and the prophets are the foundation, and we are the building blocks of this holy temple that is being joined together in the Lord. And it says the beautiful thing here, right in verse 22 of chapter 2, in him you also are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. Yeah. And that's kind of what's talked about here at the end of Revelation as well, is that God will dwell with his people. So whether it's talking about an actual scene of heaven, or just talking about the new reality of this relationship that we now have with God, the indwelling of the Spirit within us, the Spirit of God through the Word, and then having the embodiment of Christ in us in this relationship that we have now because of him is equally awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I think we did a pretty good job there of getting through all of Revelation in 50 minutes, so. Right? Not too shabby.
Yep. Yeah, I would say that it does end with, come, Jesus, come, right?
Yep.
Which is an amazing sentiment that we should all be able to talk about. Sometimes if we get too caught up in this world and too clingy to this life, it's hard for us to honestly say, come on, come back now. Right. Please return. And so we should be able to anchor our hope in Jesus and in that heavenly ideal so much where we can honestly and earnestly say, come, Jesus, come, which is wonderful. So, we completed the New Testament together. That's awesome. I really appreciate that. And I hope you've been able to gain a lot from it and from our weekly recaps. Not 100% sure what we're going to do, but I think, Kevin, I've been inspired because we just started a sermon series that'll be happening once a month at our home church here, thematically taking out things from the book of Nehemiah. So I thought that maybe we can at least start with either a chronological study through the prophets.
Okay.
Or tackling the return to Jerusalem, starting with Ezra, maybe. Anyway, we'd love your thoughts and comments about that. But there's a lot of lessons we can learn diving back into the Old Testament, which we haven't done much of this year. Sure. So that would be a good place to start. And if we do, what I'll probably do is do some Bible reading recordings for us all to kind of follow along with, and then we can have a much more chapter by chapter discussions through the books we choose. So
Sure. Tune in next time.
Tune in next time and see what we're going to do. But we also may take a little bit of time off from the daily Bible reading stuff, but at least we'll keep you posted. How's that?
There you go.
We'll keep you posted. But we'll have some more great content coming your way real soon. Until then, may God bless you all and keep you strong and persevering through all the trials of this life. And remember that there is hope in Jesus, and you need to anchor yourself in Him. And don't just be a wallflower, but be somebody who goes and tells somebody about it, because it's the best story and message in the world, and everybody needs to know all about it. So with that, we will sign off for now. God bless you all. And any last words, Kev?
No, I just saw one thing in your outline there that I really liked at the end, right? That the message isn't run from the beast, but look to the lamb, right?
Yeah.
Which is fantastic, sort of a way to think about that.
Absolutely. Don't run from the beast. Look to the lamb.
Look to the lamb.
That's right. Now, if you happen to be running to the lamb, which is also away from the beast, it's a win-win.
That's fine.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
It's fine. All right. God bless everybody. We'll see you next time.